And then they built the houses there and the road was here, which means when there rains, the house will get flooded. Now, even in political rights, we must remember that the Indian Constitution has framed the rights, the fundamental rights, with the proviso that this cannot lead to anything like destabilizing political order. So political order is first, and then political, economic and social rights. There is one notorious law which I must tell you about, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. It was actually an ordinance propagated by the British in 1942, which was used against our brothers and sisters in the northeast hills, especially Mizos and Nagas. Now it's got various versions. The Kashmir version, which I'd like to discuss for a bit, is of 1980. Three common things: impunity for rape, impunity for killing, impunity for destruction of property or anything else. You cannot charge anyone who has done or purported to have done something under the Act. What does that mean? That I do an act. I say, well, I'm doing it under the Armed Forces Act. Then the Union government has to allow the legal apparatus to take action against me. And there's not a single case where they have allowed. Secondly, there's also, as a check, the National Human Rights Commission and the State Human Rights Commission. But according to the Human Rights Act, they cannot investigate the army and they cannot investigate the paramilitary. They can ask them for their report, but they cannot investigate themselves. So where is Indian human rights? This Armed Forces Special Powers Act, in 1990, there is a village in Kashmir called Poshpora. There, 40 women were raped. There was a furor. So, a very distinguished journalist, B.G. Varghese, president of the Press Council, went and examined the place. I don't know how he examined it. He didn't have a computer or a camera, but anyway. And he came to the conclusion that nothing had happened. Now there is some talk of giving them compensation of 1 lakh. But in the meantime, there wasn't a single woman for a long time who was married in Quran Poshpora because of the rape. There is another case called the Shopian case, where 2 young women were probably bathing in a stream. The stream water was about less than 3 foot high, and according to the police, they drowned. Now, when you have a bath, if you have a tub, you are in higher than 3 foot water. Well, I don't think anyone has drowned that way. So, what happened? The doctor in the Srinagar Medical College Hospital who identified the rape and provided the evidence, she was charged by the CBI for manufacturing evidence and destroying evidence. And these examples can be borne out in even greater detail, but please remember, under the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, under other international human rights law, humanitarian law, this, and we've signed those instruments, this act is illegal. But it persists, and unfortunately some of our comrades in the left have taken it out of cold storage in Tripura because they perceive a threat. Is there a link between the two? Yes. There is now an agitation on POSCO in Odisha, where land is being taken away, and the police come regularly and beat them up. And last year I was asked by a senior faculty to examine the research proposal of a younger faculty, and I found it was a proposal on the validity of POSCO, and it was funded by the Korean company POSCO. Of course, I said my usual sweet words, and it's still contested. Every time they raise it, I raise it. But there is a link. It is not accidental that we have this attack on human rights. Because when people are suffering under globalization, they will fight. More successfully in the Mercosur area, in Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Brazil, Ecuador. Much less successfully here. We take great pride that we are the second largest nation in the world. But we don't mention it's also one of the top 5 nations where people starve. Now, there are 2 ways of looking at human rights. One where I'm interweaving the political and the economic. Another which just looks at the political. I don't think that's an adequate explanation. It is vital, but we must look at social and economic rights. Part of it is linked to the entire definition of globalization. If, as I've said, globalization means to develop at any cost, to make as much money as you can, especially for the bourgeoisie, for the capitalist class, and also have toys to fight your imaginary enemies with. You would have read yesterday that an Indian submarine blew up. I was a bit intrigued. Who are we going to use this submarine against? Sri Lanka? Certainly not the Chinese. They don't link up with us in any ocean. Pakistan? So, this is this statist and basically fundamentally bourgeois notion of strength and of national power. The second thing is that when you buy arms from anywhere, Indians are very good at getting a cut. For example, in the Bofors scam, Rajiv Gandhi allegedly took a cut. By the way, it was 65 crores. So I mean, it's nothing today. But those days it was. There is now an inquiry in the Augusta Westland helicopter. We now want high-flying helicopters for VIPs. If you want them for VIPs, then why don't you put them on a commercial aircraft in first-class seats? Or if they're really that high-flying, why don't you send them to space? But what is the point of this expenditure? The expenditure on arms, recalculated by some friends in the economics department, is that if 70% of our arms were not bought, our poverty statistics would diminish very sharply. But we do something else. There is a country called Israel, whose human rights record is much more impressive than us. They have stolen the Palestinians' land. They have built a wall around the Palestinians' land. And they kidnap people as they please. Or using our weak-kneed government, they arrest a journalist for being an agent who tried to bomb an Israeli car. Now, we were long supporters of Palestine. Now, suddenly we become supporters of Israel. Why? Because we're the highest purchasers of Israeli arms, even more than the Israeli army. So, when I spoke to, in a discussion, and they were talking about this nuclear policy of Iran, I said, what about Israel? Great friends of yours. And the diplomats went ballistic. They have no sense of national security. You don't understand the needs of India. What are the needs of India? The tiny state like Israel How is it I need? And as far as Jews are concerned, there is about 5,000 of us left, so there's no great constituency for these Israelis. But there is a link through the economy. Israelis are far smarter at drip-dry farming. That is, you use the least water to farm and other gadgets. But also, if you watch India's shift in foreign policy, it has clearly moved towards the right. From the US to Israel. It has been very silent about the attack on Syria, the intervention on Syria, where Al-Qaeda has been involved. It was very silent on Iraq, where now Hazara Shias are being killed. So why? Because once you get into this globalized index, that is the military industrial index that American President Eisenhower talked of in the early 60s, late 50s. President said it. Then it has its own momentum. Another thing I'd like to say is please read the Constitution. Why? We all say India is a federal state, right? Don't we? The word federalism is nowhere in the Indian Constitution. No federalism, no federal. So we are a federalism without federalism. In the 7th schedule, the first list, which is the union list, is by far the longest list. And then you have a state list, which is quite small. And in between you have another list which is called the concurrent list, which is about powers that belong to both states, but if there's a dispute, the union will get the power. Now this is not an accident. Where did the Indian Constitution come from? Don't believe this rubbish. I'm sure Babu bangs it every day that we looked at the Irish Constitution and we looked at the English Constitution and all of this. The basic document behind the Constitution is the Government of India Act 1935. That's the basic. So now you have a country, a giant with clay feet, doesn't have a very democratic constitution. Its economy is worsening. The Prime Minister is trying to make this better through reforms, but reforms make things worse. That's why Narendra Modi wanted to have a debate with Manmohan Singh. And of course, he had all the advantages.